Salam. How are you? Nice surprise. I know. When the BBC moves, I feel, All right. Okay. Sorry. Just obviously start on the earthquake. The first convoy, as you heard, since the earthquake happened, crossed from Türkiye into northwest Syria through the Bab el Hawa crossing. That was a convoy made up mostly from the International Organization for Migration. The cross-border assistance carried blankets, mattresses, tents, and shelter material, as well as basic relief items and solar lamps, and is set to cover the needs of at least 5,000 people with support from our local partners. We're helping in mobilizing emergency teams and relief operations in Türkiye. Over 100 urban search and rescue teams are now working on the earthquakes impacted areas in the country. At the government's request, 2 UN disaster assessment and coordination teams with a total of 50 members have been deployed to Gaziantep and to 4 hubs in the impacted area to support the coordination of the team's operations. Another UN Disaster Assistance Coordination Liaison Team deployed to Turkey's Disaster Emergency Management Ministry, who are leading the response, has also been sent and is working in Ankara, in Turkey's capital. A separate UN UNDAC team is on its way to Syria to support the response there, and they will be traveling in from Lebanon. Our humanitarian teams underscore that in Syria, including in the northwest, urgent funding is needed to provide shelter, health, nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, education, protection, psychosocial support services, and many other things in this critical phase of our response to the quake. Earlier today, you heard from the Secretary General himself on this issue. He announced that by early next week, we will launch a flash appeal for donor support to those affected by the quake. He said the UN is ready to support the Turkish government's response in any way we can. The appeal will be focused on Syria. He also reaffirmed that the UN has done its best to race to the respond and is deploying as many staff as we can and also providing emergency relief as much as we can. Martin Griffiths, the emergency relief coordinator, is on his way to the area. He will be in Gaziantep, Aleppo, and Damascus in the coming days to assess the situation. The Secretary General appealed to the international community to show the people of Turkey and Syria the same kind of support and generosity with which they received, protected, and assisted millions of refugees and displaced people in an enormous show of solidarity over the years. And you may have also seen a statement out of Geneva by Geir Pedersen, our special envoy for Syria. He said that emergency response must not be politicized. Instead, the focus must be on what is needed urgently to help men, women, and children whose lives are devastated by one of the most catastrophic earthquakes the region has ever seen. Turning to Haiti, where our colleagues from the UN Children's Fund are telling us that acts of armed violence against schools in the country, including shooting, ransacking, looting, kidnappings, have increased 9-fold over the past year. This is in the first 4 months of the academic year, which goes from October to February. 72 schools were reportedly targeted, compared to 8 in the same period last year. This includes at least 13 schools targeted by armed groups. 1 school was set on fire, a student was killed, and at least 2 staff members were kidnapped. That's according to our UNICEF colleagues and their partners on the ground. An estimated 1 million school children are currently out of school in Haiti due to the social unrest, the insecurity, the high cost of education, and poor educational services. Quick update from Chile, where our team on the ground is responding to the government's request for support to address the country's deadliest wildfire emergency. We are currently assessing needs, coordinating among several partners, and supporting with information management and mobilizing funding for the people who live and work in the most impacted zone. A couple of notes from Africa, one from Burkina Faso, where our humanitarian colleagues are reporting that 2 staff members of an international NGO were killed yesterday morning when their vehicle, clearly identified as belonging to an aid organization, was shot at by armed men in the Boucle de Mouhoun region in the northwest of the country. Both staff members were nationals of Burkina Faso. The vehicle was carrying a 4-person medical team. 2 other team members managed to escape. The NGO temporarily suspended its activities in the area. The resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator at interim Burkina Faso, Abdouraouf Gnon Condé, condemned the attack and called it not only a violation of international humanitarian law, but also an attack on the rights and well-being of children, women, and men who depend on humanitarian aid to survive. And our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic say that they supported the High Court in Bria in holding a civil mobile court on personal status matters. This symbolic hearing was also the first in the locality which has not received a visit by magistrates in more than 16 years. And I think that underscores the issue of extending state services throughout the country. The mission this week also launched a project with the UN Population Fund in collaboration with the Bria High Court to issue birth certificates to 500 children and women from the town of Samwanja in Haute-Koto Prefecture to promote schooling and assist women to be able to vote in ongoing electoral process. Meanwhile, the UN peacekeepers worked with local authorities in Kagabandoro in Naga Gurbenzi Prefecture to improve security system for the next elections in the region. The mission reports that it has increased patrolling over the past week to provide security in response to possible threats, as well as to establish a deterrent presence. WHO said today that Africa is witnessing an exponential rise in cholera cases amid a global surge. They note that cases recorded in the continent in the first month of this year alone have already risen by more than 30% of the total caseload that we witnessed in 2022. An estimated 26,000 cases and 660 deaths have been reported as of January 29th of this year in 10 African countries. A lot more online. This evening there will be a film screening to which you're invited to. It's 6:30, conference room 4. Filmmakers Ken Burns and the producer-director Lynn Novick, historian Daniel Green, and Ellen Germain, the special U.S. envoy for Holocaust issues, will discuss a screening of a short version of Ken Burns' documentary called U.S. and the Holocaust. If you haven't seen it when it aired, you should see it. The film examines the rise of Hitler and Nazism in Germany in the context of global anti-Semitism and racism, the eugenics movement in the U.S., and race laws in the American South. The documentary tackles a range of questions that remain essential to our society today. And lastly, I had good news on the money front, but I don't have the note. But if I recall, we have 3 countries added to the honor roll, 2 monarchies, and one of only 2 European diarchies. I'm sorry, Benno's not here. So we thank our friends in Kuwait and New Zealand. Come on, 1 or 2 diarchies in Europe. San Marino, 2 co-heads of states. San Marino, ruled by 2 captain co-regents. Exactly. All right, Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. First, to follow up on Syria and the remarks of the Secretary General and the part you read before regarding the generosity of the Syrian and Turkish people to accept in the past refugees from different countries and conflict, etc. Does the Secretary General believe that given the current situation, especially for people in Syria and North Syria, that countries should open their borders and ports, airports, to take people in need, given the fact that
I
a lot of
think the Secretary General's position has been always consistent, is that all countries should show generosity to those who are fleeing violence, fleeing natural disasters. Neighboring countries in a crisis always bear the brunt, and we saw, as the Secretary General mentioned, we saw Syria open its borders to Iraqi refugees during the worst of the violence there. Turkey, we know, hosts I think 1.7 million Syrian refugees, if not more. There's a global responsibility, and yes, other countries further afield need to show solidarity.
And I have another question about a different subject, and that's Italy. So the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Mary Lawler, I hope I didn't mess up her family name. She issued a statement today condemning the criminalization and repression of human rights defender involved in sea rescue charities in Italy ahead of the trial of an NGO crew member in Sicily. She also talks about procedural violence, including failure to provide adequate interpretation for non-Italian defendant and translation of key documents. So do you have a specific comment on that case and on
on that particular case, no. And as you know, the special rapporteurs work independently of the Secretary General. However, we have seen in a number of countries organizations that are NGOs are out there to help people who are fleeing violence, to help refugees, to help migrants in their basic human rights and their basic dignity, being prosecuted. And that is a concern. And the High Commissioner for Refugees has also expressed his concern on that issue. And it underscores again that, some countries, by their geography, are more impacted by migratory flows of people, right? But it doesn't mean that they should be the only ones responsible. But this push against NGOs that help refugees and migrants in a number of countries is concerning. Deji, and then
I have two questions. Quick question. First one, is the Secretary General having any plans to visit the earthquake-impacted area?
Not at this point. I mean, I think this is extremely early. His visit would take resources away from the actual rescue. The last thing he wants to do is get in the way. However, he will be very focused on banging the drums, especially once the appeal is launched, to ensure that there is global generosity towards those who need it the most.
So what might be the target for this flash appeal next week?
People who have money.
How much?
We're trying to figure out how much. We're still doing the needs assessment, but I would also encourage the public can also give through on the OCHA website, the UN Foundation websites. There are ways for the public to give to the appeal.
I have some more questions, but next round.
Okay, please, Maggie.
Steph, are you considering bringing any UN staff from other missions to the zone to help with the earthquake response?
At this point, I mean, we have humanitarian staff on standby, like disaster, so they will be going. I think it's a bit early days. I think each humanitarian agency will make its own staffing decisions. They obviously are very flexible in how they can move people around, but it's also an issue of being able to support the number of people that you send in when you're going into a zone that's been basically destroyed and has limited capacity to house, not only to house and feed the people impacted, but also it's the aid workers.
And roughly how many staff does the UN have in Syria and in Turkey?
I don't think the numbers have changed very much. I think it's about things I thought I knew by heart, but I don't. What? Yes, exactly. It's Yeah, there's always something. We have about 700, I think, we have about 700 in the quake-impacted area. Syria, about 400, and the remainder in southern Turkey. And that number will fluctuate, obviously, but I don't think greatly in the immediate. Yep.
For those not super familiar with how the UN does their assessments, when Martin Griffith does go, what goes into figuring out what needs there are? Is that more short-term, long-term? And will that feed into, how does that feed into the flash appeal and how much you ask?
Okay, so that will, what our team, the information our teams are gathering now will feed into the flash appeal. It's basically UNICEF assessing what their needs are in the areas for which they're responsible, which is obviously children, water, UNHCR, IOM, International Organization for Migration, World Food Program, figure out what the immediate needs are. So right now we're really talking about the short-term needs, and obviously in consultation with local authorities. And WHO? And yes, I mean I could run through all of the acronyms.
In terms of his trip when he goes there.
Yeah. I mean, he's obviously will be speaking to the authorities in Türkiye. He's going to Gaziantep, which is UN's humanitarian hub. He will no doubt have meetings with all the representatives of the UN agencies, local NGOs, local partners, and the national partners as well. He will then go to Damascus, and he will also have discussions in Syria as well. Yep.
Thank you, Stéphane. The cross-border mechanism that adopted by Security Council allows the aid through Bab el Hawa without any authorization by Syrian regime. Now, in light of this disaster, if the regime allows and authorizes the needed cross-border access, will there be any need for a resolution from the Security Council?
I think
Yes.
we operate the cross-border through a Security Council resolution. I mean, our guidance, the UN's guidance, comes from the Security Council on that. I think the Secretary General was pretty clear this morning about obviously if there is more is better. I think we will start discussions with Security Council members, some consultations, to see if we can move in that direction. But I think it's very important that our aim is to deliver more humanitarian aid. Our aim is not to politicize even more an already very politicized issue in an area that is extremely delicate politically, if I can use all those terms. So our aim is a humanitarian aim, and we will work with council members. We will work, obviously, with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic, all with that same aim.
Does that mean that there is a need for a resolution, for more cross-border?
We can only operate a second we as the UN can only use a second cross-border if there is a Security Council resolution. And I don't want to get into, obviously there's a lot of legal issues and it's a delicate issue. And from my understanding, other non-UN organizations may be using some other cross-border points, but we obviously work within certain parameters dictated to us by international law and various resolutions.
Is that what I want to know exactly? Who is blocking the aid? Those who are with the mechanism or against the mechanism?
We're not talking about blocking aid. I mean, you can have that discussion. We're right now using as much as we can the inbound avenues that we have for aid, and that is the cross-border and the cross-line. The cross-line discussions for the next convoy are ongoing. We're talking to the Syrian government. We hope to have something soon. So that's a discussion you may want to have with diplomats here, But for us, we're not looking to play a blame game. We're just looking to help people as quickly as possible. Okay, let me go. Michelle, you had a question.
Yes,
Michelle.
please. Sorry. Follow up to those questions that have just been asked. Actually, when you say you're going to start discussions with Security Council members, how many additional crossings would the UN like to use? Which ones? And has the UN formally asked Syria for approval first to use these crossings to avoid the need for another Security Council resolution?
Well, I fully understand your needs, Michelle. I'm not going to go into the granularity of the discussions that will be initiated. We want to try to keep things simple. We want to see unity from the Security Council, and that's the way we're going to move forward.
So you just indicated to us, though, that the UN plans to start discussions with Security Council members about expanding
Exactly.
access.
And I will leave it at that.
To include more crossings.
I will leave it at that. I did say that.
To include more crossings.
I will leave it at that, yes. Deji.
And I think I heard Maggie ask the Secretary General this morning if he'd spoken with President Assad, and I think he said he hasn't. Does he plan to try and speak with him? Is Martin Griffiths will meet with him?
At this point, we are speaking with the mission. Martin Griffiths will be in Damascus in the coming days. We'll see what meetings he has while he's there. Maggie and then Deji. And then Abdelhamid, I think you had a question. I'll come back to you.
So
Thank you, Stéphane. I mean, most of the questions had been asked, but my question, if there is any casualty within the UN staff, the 700 on both sides, are all UN staff safe?
At this point, the head count is continuing.
Okay, the second is there any update from UNRWA about the casualties among Palestinian refugees in northwestern Syria?
None since we shared something with you, I think, on Tuesday, but we'll ask. Maggie and then Deji.
on the aid that the Secretary General said got through today.
Yeah.
That's to the north, to the areas outside government control. So do we know anything about what's gone through to Aleppo or to places that are within government control, or is the government handling that all themselves, or are you helping them?
Well, we're there and we're assisting. We're obviously assisting the authorities, the Syrian authorities in the government-controlled areas. I'll try to get a bit more details about what they're doing there. Deji.
I have two totally different topics here.
Excellent.
On Tuesday, President Biden delivered his State of the Union, and among his speech, he said that new standards to require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. American-made lumber, glass, drywall, fiber, optic cables. Does the UN consider it an announcement of a form of trade protectionism, and should be concerned about this?
I appreciate you trying to drag me into something I don't want to be dragged into. I think there's a difference, just in principle, there's a difference in saying you're going to buy things from your own country and saying you're going to put up barriers not to allow things from a different country to be imported. Your next question.
All right, so, yeah, but he said only...
I know what he said, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the next question, actually, I'm just curious about this because we know that ChatGPT is quite popular nowadays online. I just want to know whether the UN has used it or will use it. I mean,
do you know what happens? You ask
Yeah.
the question, it actually goes into the ChatGPT and it tells me what I say to you.
Oh, Steph, if
I've been using it for a while.
If that was the case,
Yeah.
the question I asked about the State of the Union should go like the goal of this policy is to create and sustain good paying jobs in the states while investing in the country's infrastructure. But it's seen as a form of trade protectionism and it seeks prioritize domestic production, blah, 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 you know.
Okay.
Yeah, so
No, of ChatGPT, no, we are not using it to the best of my knowledge. But I think it is something, it is another issue, I think, which needs to be studied in depth to ensure that the needed guardrails are put in place, that it is not something that leads to a system that is abused or misused. Okay, hasta mañana.